Okay, so we're going to take a couple minutes and talk about the literary canon. What is the literary canon, you might ask? That's a good question. And let's take a moment and think about what the word canon means and perhaps some of the denotative and connotative meanings that would come with that word. Remember that denotative is the dictionary definition of a word, whereas connotative is the association. So it could be positive, negative, neutral, something very subjective and personal, right? Or objective. So the dictionary definition of canon is a general law, rule, principle, or criterion by which something is judged, and a collection or list of sacred books accepted as genuine. So if we think of, this is the dictionary definition of the word. When we think of the associations with that word, there's a sense of high value and worth, but also elitism, right? And something, a measure that not everything can reach. So then applying that idea to what the literary canon is, it's a who's who of authors and famous works. And in the past, it was a list dominated by white male authors that people deemed worth reading. And we'll put worth in quotes. For example, Shakespeare, Jonathan Swift, Tennyson, Edgar Allan Poe, William Faulkner. You could see a theme here, right? And even when I was in school, if I really look back at the works I was assigned, it was typically mostly white male authors. Occasionally they throw a white female in there, but very rarely was it a person of color. And you may think about your past English classes or classes in general and the extent to which they valued the narratives of people who were not white. So, a lot of this has to do with the ways in which white European countries, right, were privileged over others. And what I love about this upside down map is that it turns our concept of how big Europe and the United States are on its head, right? And we start to see how the ways in which certain narratives have been privileged over others, even though they really don't occupy a majority of the space, right? So in the past, what would happen is different critical theories would contribute to academic conversations. And if you'll recall in the last class, we talked about briefly feminist theory, psychoanalytic theory. I think I may have even mentioned Marxist theory, but there are other theories such as queer theory, critical race theory, post-colonialism, right? And these different theories basically pointed out the ways in which narratives were excluding or misrepresenting portions of the population. And so that helped people to see the holes that existed in the traditional canon, right? And really rethink what that list was. And I put list in quotes because oftentimes it's not a fixed list. It's usually based on the conversations that are occurring at that time about what books are popular. So for instance, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was very popular when it was published, and then it kind of disappeared from academic conversations. And then in the last 50 years or so, it reappeared. So, it's important to think about ways in which the canon in which you were raised, in terms of what you were assigned, will look a lot different than generations that follow us. Right? And the other thing to consider is that every field has a canon. If you study film, there are certain filmmakers that are known or highly regarded, and in order to be well versed in film studies, you would need to know these filmmakers and have researched them, or at least seen their films, right? And the same can be applied to scientists, lawyers, psychologists, etc., right? So, the questions that we should be asking ourselves, even as we read what's assigned this semester, is, what narratives are missing? Is what's being discussed inclusive, right? And What is the validity, can't even say the word, of any of these narratives, right? And how do we judge them? And really thinking about how these questions help us think critically about representation and voices that are being heard. So what we'll talk about next are the concepts of genre and conventions.